We turn next to our Friday roundtable conversation about some of the week's top stories. We will look at the future of Afghanistan this week, America's expanding involvement in that war, and whether or not the conflict can be won. There is increasing pressure on Pakistan to confront terror at home and in neighboring India, and then the tragic, almost surreal world that is Zimbabwe, a country on the brink and seemingly in denial. What can the United States do? Here with us again are two of our regulars, Carla Robbins, Deputy Editorial Page Editor of the New York Times, and Gideon Rose, Managing Editor of Foreign Affairs Magazine. Good Friday to you both.
Good to be here.
Carla, we'll start with you. Afghanistan. We had Secretary of Defense Gates yesterday start to outline some of the numbers of troops that will be there maybe by summer. Is this a winnable war?
Well, I'd hate to do the weasel word thing, but it depends on how you define win. There are so many things that are wrong there, but it's pretty clear what Afghanistan itself needs. It needs a stable, reasonably accountable government that's not the Taliban. And to do that, it's not just winnable inside of Afghanistan. You've got to deal with Pakistan. You've got to deal with the whole region. It's a big, big mess, as we know. But from my point of view, there isn't any choice. The last thing we want to do is have an Afghanistan that's completely ungovernable, that's pouring opium in the world, and once again is a safe haven, a complete safe haven for al-Qaeda. I mean, that is, that's job one. This was the good war, and we're close to losing it, and I just don't think from a strategic point of view we can afford to.
Well, one of the things that struck me was that the first place the troops are going to go is the capital. In other words, if the capital is in that much jeopardy,
that is not a comforting fact.
Well, we can't take on everybody, and part of the solution, in addition to better techniques and more troops and better doctrine, is going to have to be dividing the Taliban up into those that are bad locally but aren't really a threat to us, and those that really are a much larger threat. We're going to have to basically make our peace with some unsavory characters who are less unsavory than other ones. And not a total threat to us.
But if we do that, aren't we selling out the people of Afghanistan? I mean, from everything I've heard, they despise the Taliban. They've had a dose of them. They don't want them back. If we start negotiating with the Taliban, aren't we going back on sort of the things we believe in?
Well, we talked about this a few weeks ago,
right.
And there's the Taliban, and then there are all the disaffected people who have decided that the Karzai government, the NATO, that the Americans or whatever, are not giving them what they need, whether it's money or support or honesty or sort of just a daily living itself. And I think there is a possibility, as Gideon says, to break off people from it. If you could have a government that was more accountable, and if you could have a NATO that wasn't indiscriminately killing civilians. I mean, there's a big, big problem with American military strategy there, in part because there aren't enough troops there. But if you keep, killing off civilians, you're going to drive more and more people to the Taliban. I don't think those people are necessary Taliban. They're disaffected, they're angry people, and I think there is a chance to break those people off. Mullah Omar, no.
Mm-hmm. Gideon, let me ask you to talk about their next-door neighbor, Pakistan. We've had developments now regarding these roundups of Lashkar-e-Taiba and trying to soothe both the concerns of the United States and the Indians in the aftermath of Mumbai. Is Pakistan really acting here, or is this window dressing?
Well, the civilian government in Pakistan does seem to want to put a lid on this and want to have interests aligned with India and the West to a certain extent. But the military powers that be inside Pakistan have very different interests. And so the real question is not just will the Pakistani government do what we want it to do or be on our side, but can the government control the military? And how, if not, how do the outside powers and outside players get the Pakistani military to be a force for stability rather than instability in the region? And the short and sad answer is that we don't really know how to do that.
Mm-hmm. Carla, that's a really frightening scenario where you have a civilian government that apparently doesn't have control over its military.
Well, it's not just the military, it's the intelligence services. And these groups, the group that everyone believes was responsible for the attacks in Mumbai, have long been a proxy force, a creation of, supported by the intelligence services, which are part of the military, hugely powerful itself. I mean, what they have to understand, the Pakistani, and I don't mean to be so overly prescriptive, but I think if Pakistani sat down and really thought about it, the threat is in India. The threat is extremism, the extremism inside. They lost Benazir Bhutto. There's constantly bombs going off itself. This isn't a question of fighting America's war on terror. This is a fight for survival for the Pakistani people themselves. I think the Indians deserve an enormous amount of credit at this moment for not overreacting, for not giving the Pakistani military and the intelligence services yet one more reason to see India as the moral strategic issue. India is not the moral strategic issue. The moral strategic issue is the enemy within and the enemy on the border with Pakistan. And the intelligence services have to understand that, and the military has to understand that. Zardari talks like he's beginning to get it. The United States does have some leverage. It's got billions of dollars of aid and billions of dollars more that it could promise. But this is a very long developmental issue. But there's also this immediate issue here right now, which is they have to roll these networks up because it is a survival issue for them.
Let's turn now to the subject of Zimbabwe, which is a country that continues to just seem to get worse and worse. President Robert Mugabe announces that cholera, the war against cholera, has been won. It's a ridiculous statement given the fact that there are 16,000 of his country people who are infected with the disease and at least 800, if not more, have died. Gideon, what does the U.S. do about this?
Well, if we have a decent amount of influence in Afghanistan and some with Pakistan, we have very little in Zimbabwe. The problem is that Mugabe is a tyrant who has long outstayed his welcome, but there's not much that the United States can do from the outside, especially if the regional players around him aren't willing to step up and be the frontline people.
Carla, I mean, this is a situation where we watch it, we feel powerless, but we realize neighbors there. It has to be an African solution, is that it?
Well, certainly South Africa does have potential influence. It's a huge amount of economic influence in this place, and they've been enabling Mugabe forever. And I think the lesson for the South Africans is this not containable? It's not a political issue. This is an incredible human tragedy. The cholera is moving across the border. Refugees are moving across the border. It is time to stop enabling this tyrant. They got to talk to the people around Mugabe and tell them it is time to go.
What about military intervention, Gideon?
I don't see it happening, certainly not by the United States, because there just aren't the strategic interests involved. And once an operation started, the very people involved probably wouldn't be too happy about it either. So unfortunately, this is going to continue for a long time until the locals in the region, South Africa in particular, decides it wants some change.
Gideon Rose, Carla Robbins, always a pleasure, despite the subject. Wonderful to see you both. Thank you.
Thank you.